I used to believe that a quiet life meant a good life. I worked long weeks as a civil engineer, took on out-of-state projects that kept me on the road 3 weeks out of every 4, and came home proud that I could give my family everything they needed. A house in a decent neighborhood in Raleigh, a savings account that nobody touched because there was always enough. A son named Connor who drew superheroes on construction paper and left them taped to my suitcase so I'd find them in hotel rooms halfway across the country. I thought I was a good husband. I thought I was a good father. I was wrong about one of those things. It started on a Sunday afternoon in late October. I was home for a long weekend, doing nothing more dangerous than looking for the iPad charger in the kitchen junk drawer. When I found the device itself sitting on the counter with the screen still lit, Connor had been using it to watch videos, and he'd left it open. I picked it up to plug it in and charge it, and that's when I saw the notification banner slide across the top of the screen. A message in something called the Heart Girls chat. I wouldn't have thought twice about it. My wife Dana came from a close family, and her mother Vivian and her younger sister Paige were always texting about something. But the preview of that message stopped me cold. Paige had written, "He still has no idea, Lowell. How does someone travel that much and never check his own accounts?" I stood at that kitchen counter for a long time, long enough for the screen to go dark. I pressed the home button. I opened the chat. I am not going to tell you that I sat down and cried. I didn't. Something happened inside me that I can only describe as a door closing very quietly, very firmly, in a room I hadn't known existed. I read every message in that thread. It went back 14 months. The short version is this. While I was working in Houston, in Memphis, and outside Sacramento for weeks at a stretch, trusting my wife completely with our joint finances because she had always handled the household, and I had always been too busy to pay close attention, Dana had been systematically siphoning money from our shared accounts. The messages laid it out with a casualness that still makes my jaw tighten to think about. There were references to transfers she described to me as property tax payments and HVAC repair, and the water heater finally died. Thank God I caught it early. I had believed every single one. I had wired money home from job sites in 3 different states because my wife told me something in the house had broken, and I had thanked God she was there to handle it. The money wasn't going to any of those things. There were references to someone called D. D was here again today. Dana had written in one message. Connor was at school. Vivian kept him for me on Tuesday. It's been 6 months and Nathan still doesn't suspect anything. He's so trusting it's almost sad. Her mother had responded with a laughing emoji. Paige had written, "Classic Nathan. Man's out there building bridges while his wife builds a whole other life." I set the iPad down. I pressed both palms flat on the counter. I breathed. I am 51 years old. I have managed $100 million infrastructure projects. I have kept my head when a retaining wall collapsed at 2 a.m., and a client was screaming on the phone and my crew was looking at me to tell them what to do next. I know how to be calm when everything around me is not. I used that skill right then, in my own kitchen, in a way I had never imagined I would need to. I did not confront Dana that night. I did not confront her the next night, or the week after that, or the month after that. I went back to work on Monday morning, kissed my wife on the cheek, hugged Connor until he squirmed and laughed and told me I was embarrassing him. And I flew to a project site in Knoxville where I sat in a rental car for 20 minutes before I called the best family law attorney in Wake County. Her name was Renata Cole, and she had a voice like a woman who had seen everything twice and been impressed by none of it. When I laid out what I had, screenshots of the chat, a rough accounting of the transfers I could reconstruct from memory, the name of Dana's father's old college friend, Derek Marsh, who I now understood was the D mentioned in every other message. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Get me everything you can find, and don't touch anything you shouldn't." I asked her what I shouldn't touch. She said, "Don't confront anyone. Don't threaten anyone. Don't move money. Don't do anything that hands them ammunition." I said I understood. I meant it. Over the following 6 weeks, I became a different kind of engineer. I mapped the problem methodically. I requested statements on every account Dana had access to. I was still the primary account holder on most of them, which she had apparently never thought to question, perhaps because she assumed I never looked. The picture that emerged was not pretty. Just over $60,000 had been moved in the preceding 18 months in transactions, small enough to look routine if you weren't paying attention. I had not been paying attention. The HVAC, the water heater, the property tax, the car maintenance fees, they were all fiction. There were also 3 cash withdrawals that I could not account for at all. I hired a private investigator for 2 weeks. He gave me photographs and timestamps. Derek Marsh drove a black Pathfinder. He visited my house on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which were days I was reliably away. In one photograph, he was standing in my driveway laughing at something on his phone. In another, he was walking in the front door with a cup of coffee in each hand. He had a key to my house. My wife had given a key to my house to the man she was sleeping with. I found out something else during those 6 weeks, and it came from a school form of all places. Connor's pediatric records had been requested by his new school for an emergency contact update, and I had taken it on myself to collect the paperwork from the doctor's office since Dana had asked me to, and I was trying to be normal about everything. The nurse printed out a summary sheet along with the forms. I almost didn't read it. I almost just tucked it in the folder and handed it to my wife. I read it. Connor's blood type is O negative. I am AB positive. Dana is A positive. I sat in the parking lot at the pediatrician's office for a long time. I called Renata Cole. She told me to get a DNA test through a licensed laboratory, through proper channels with a sample I collected legally. I did. I used the service she recommended. I sent in the samples, and I waited 10 days and I got the results in an email that I read standing outside a truck stop in Knoxville at 6 in the morning while the sky went from black to gray. Connor was not my biological son. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt in that moment, because it is easy to get this wrong. I want to be precise. What I felt was grief, immediate and physical, like something knocked the air out of my chest. Not rage, not betrayal. I was well past the discovery phase of betrayal by then. Just grief. Because Connor was still Connor. He was still the boy who taped superheroes to my suitcase. He was still mine in every way that I understood the word to mean anything real. Whatever the laboratory said about biology, I was his father, and I was going to make sure that didn't change. But I needed to know the truth, all of it, before I walked into whatever was coming next. The DNA result went straight to Renata's files. She said it changed the legal landscape considerably, and not in Dana's favor. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Vivienne hosted it every year, the entire Hartwell family. Dana, Paige, Paige's husband Owen, whatever cousins happened to be passing through, gathered at Vivienne's colonial house in Cary, North Carolina, ate too much, argued about football, and dispersed. I had attended this dinner for 13 years. I had brought the good wine every single time. I had helped Vivienne carry folding chairs up from the basement and complimented her cooking even when it didn't need complimenting. Because that is what you do when you are trying to be a good son-in-law to a woman who, it turns out, was actively advising her daughter on how to financially ruin you. I told Dana I wouldn't miss it for the world. In the 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I did 3 things. First, I opened a new checking account at a different bank, in my name only, and redirected my direct deposit. Second, I worked with Renata to file the initial divorce paperwork, sealed and ready to be served at the moment of my choosing. Third, I had my assistant compile a set of folders, 9 of them, printed and organized, containing bank statements, transfer records, screenshots, the Pi's photographs, and a summary memo Renata had drafted. I had 1 folder for Dana, 1 for Vivienne, 1 for Vivienne, 1 for Derek Marsh with a separate memo, because Derek had apparently signed off on at least 2 of the renovation estimates as a licensed contractor, which meant his name was on fraudulent documents. 2 copies for Renata, 1 for the financial crimes investigator at the DA's office, whom Renata had already spoken to informally, 1 for me, and 1 that I intended to hand to Paige's husband Owen, because Owen had not appeared once in the Heart Girls chat, had not been copied on a single email, and from everything I could observe was a decent man who had no idea his wife had been helping orchestrate the systematic theft from his brother-in-law. I arranged for Connor to spend the night with my sister's family 2 towns over. I told him it was a special pre-Thanksgiving cousin's sleepover, and he was delighted. I drove to Vivienne's house alone. The house smelled like roasting turkey and cinnamon candles. which I had always found comforting and now found almost unbearable in its ordinary cheerfulness. Vivienne greeted me at the door with the warmth she had always shown me. The warmth I now understood was a performance. She was 72 years old, and she had the posture of a woman who considered herself the axis around which her family rotated. She kissed my cheek and said she was glad I could make it, and I said I couldn't have stayed away. Dana was in the kitchen. She wore a cream-colored sweater, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked so much like the woman I had married that I had to stand in the doorway for a moment before I walked in. She smiled. I smiled back. Paige was chopping something on a cutting board and made a joke about me always showing up right when the work was done. Owen was in the living room watching pre-game coverage, and he stood up when I came in and shook my hand and asked me how the Knoxville project was going. I told him it was wrapping up. He said that was great. He had a good handshake, Owen did, direct. He looked at you when he spoke. We ate dinner. I helped carry plates. I answered questions about Connor's soccer season. I declined a second glass of wine and nobody commented on it. Vivienne said grace, which she always did, and included a line about gratitude for family, which I sat through without expression. I was very, very calm when the plates were cleared and the pie was on the counter and everyone was in that loose, comfortable post-meal drift. I said I had something I wanted to share with the family before dessert. I said it the way you'd announce you had tickets to something good. Conversational. Light. Dana looked up from the dessert plates with a small, pleasant smile, waiting. I had left my bag in the front hall. I went and got it. I came back to the dining room table. I set a folder at Dana's place, one at Vivienne's, one at Vivienne's. I slid one to Owen at the end of the table, and when I looked at him I held his eyes for a second and said, quietly, that I was sorry he was here for this. Owen frowned. He looked down at the folder. I sat down and said, go ahead and open them. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. Then Vivienne opened her folder and the silence ended. I will not pretend it was clean. It was not clean. Dana went white in a way I had never seen a person go white before, as if the blood had simply left her face entirely. Vivienne said my name once, sharply, as if she could stop what was happening with the right tone of authority. Paige looked at the transfer records and then looked at me and then looked at her mother and said, Mom, in a voice that contained a question I had no interest in answering for her. Owen leafed through his folders slowly. He was a methodical reader. He got to the summary page and set the folder down and stared at the tablecloth for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, to his wife, Paige, did you know about this? Paige said it wasn't what it looked like. Owen turned the folder to face her and pointed to her name on one of the email threads and asked her to explain what it looked like then. Dana found her voice first. She said these were private documents, that I had no right, that she could explain the transfers, that it was complicated. I let her talk. She had been talking to me this way for years. The particular cadence of a woman who has concluded that her husband is too agreeable to push back. I let her run through the whole register of it. Justifications. The marriage hadn't been right for years. I was never home. She had needs that weren't being met. She had met Derek at a low point and it had just happened. I said, it happened for over 2 years, on Tuesdays and Thursdays in our house, while your mother kept my son out of the way. The room went quiet again. Vivienne said, you are not going to do this to this family. That is what she said. Not I'm sorry. Not how did it come to this. She said, you are not going to do this. I looked at her directly. I said, Vivienne, I've already done it. The divorce papers are filed. The DA's office received a copy of those documents 2 days ago. What you do now is between you and your attorneys. She went to stand up and I think she intended to leave the room, but she stopped and sat back down, and I will not pretend that didn't give me some satisfaction. Dana said there was something she wanted to tell me. Something important. She said she had been trying to find a way to bring it up for a long time. She said she needed me to understand that Connor, she paused here, that Connor might not be, and she stopped again. I said, I know about Connor. I said it quietly. I said the DNA results are also in the file. Dana's hand went to her mouth. She started crying then. Not the manageable, pretty kind of crying. The kind that comes from somewhere below the chest and sounds like something breaking. I watched it happen and I felt, I want to be honest about this. I felt nothing in particular toward her in that moment. The sadness I'd had in the parking lot of the pediatrician's office was already spent. What I felt toward Dana now was a clean, cold finality. We were done. The only question was the shape of the aftermath. Paige had gone very still. She was looking at her husband, who was not looking at her. Owen had put his copy of the folder in his lap and laced his fingers together on top of it and was staring at the wall. He had the expression of a man doing internal math that was not coming out the way he wanted. Vivian said, "That child loves you. Whatever else has happened, you are the only father he has known, and if you use this in court, you are a cruel man, and I want nothing more to do with you." I said, "I have no intention of walking away from Connor. I have every intention of making sure he has one stable parent in his life, because his mother has spent the last 2 years proving she cannot be trusted with the finances of a household or the truth. That's what I'm telling the court." Dana said, "You'll never get custody." She said it through the crying and the ugliness of it. That she would reach for Connor as a weapon even now was the most clarifying thing she had said all night. She said, "No judge gives full custody to a father who's never home. You were barely here. You were always gone. You were a ghost in this marriage." I said, "I was working to pay for the house you raised your boyfriend in." She flinched. I had meant her to. I said, "And just so there's no ambiguity, Renata Cole has the chat log from the Heart Girls thread, including the one from April where you and your mother discussed how to provoke me into a public incident so you could claim in court that I had anger issues. I want you to know I'm aware of that plan. I want you to know it isn't going to work. And I want you to know that the judge is going to read every word of that thread." Vivian looked at Dana. Dana looked at her mother. It was one of those looks that is entirely a conversation. Owen stood up. He said, to the room in general, but mostly to Paige, "I'm going home." He picked up his folder. He said to me, "Nathan, I am sorry." I said I appreciated that. He said he had had no idea. I told him I believed him. He put on his coat and walked out, and I heard the front door close, and then the sound of his car starting. Paige got up to follow him, and Vivian told her to sit down, and Paige stood in the doorway for a second and then went after her husband anyway. That left me and Dana and Vivian. Vivian tried one more time. She said we could handle this privately. She said there was no reason to involve the DA's office over what was essentially a domestic financial dispute. She said she could make arrangements to repay what she called the misunderstanding. I think she genuinely believed that if she used the right language, she could still manage the situation. She had been managing her family's situations for 50 years. I said, "The money would be nice, but it's not the point. The point is that you and your daughter treated me like a resource to be harvested, not a person. You mocked me in a group chat for being trusting. You called me a ghost. You told your daughter to drain my accounts and get the house. You kept my son away on Tuesdays and Thursdays so your daughter could have her boyfriend over undisturbed, and you did it for over a year. And you thought you would never have to answer for it, because you had decided I was too soft to look up." She had nothing to say to that. I said, "The DA's timeline is not mine to control. Renata's filings are not mine to stop at this point. What I can tell you is that if you and Dana cooperate fully, full financial disclosure, no custody interference, a fair settlement, Renata will communicate that to the other side, and it may affect how aggressively the DA's office pursues the fraud charges. That is the only conversation I'm willing to have." I stood up. I put on my coat. I said Happy Thanksgiving, and I meant it to sting, and I walked out. The drive home was 40 minutes. I stopped at a gas station and bought a bottle of water and sat in the parking lot for a while. The adrenaline took a long time to clear. I called my sister to check on Connor, and she said he was asleep and had eaten an enormous amount of leftover Halloween candy, and I laughed, genuinely for the first time in 6 weeks. What followed was not fast, and it was not easy. I want to be clear about that. The movies always cut from the confrontation to the tidy resolution, and real life does not work that way. There were 7 months of depositions and mediation sessions, and days when Renata called me to report that Dana's lawyers had filed something that required a response, and I had to sit with the specific, grinding exhaustion of a process designed to outlast your patience. The fraud charges moved separately. Vivian and Dana both retained criminal defense attorneys. Page's lawyer negotiated a cooperation agreement relatively quickly. Page had knowledge of the scheme, but had not personally signed anything or benefited financially. And with Owen's support, she decided early that cooperation was the only rational path. She called me once, in January, and apologized. I listened and said I appreciated it and told her to take care of herself. I meant both things equally. Derek Marsh's name on those contractor documents turned out to be a significant problem for him. He had signed as a licensed contractor on 3 renovation estimates for work that was never performed, which crossed lines that were outside my divorce and firmly inside a criminal statutes conversation. His license was suspended pending investigation. His wife found out. She had apparently suspected the affair for some time but not the financial involvement, and filed for divorce herself within a month of the Thanksgiving dinner. I heard this through Renata's network of knowing things. I didn't call to confirm. I didn't need to. The custody hearing was the hardest part. I want to be honest about that too. Dana's lawyers did exactly what she had promised. They argued that my travel schedule made me an inconsistent presence and that the violence of the financial discovery had made the home environment unstable. Renata put the Heart Girls chat on the projector in the courtroom. The message where Dana and Vivian had discussed, in specific terms, how to manufacture an incident that would play badly for me in a custody proceeding. The judge, a woman in her mid-60s who had clearly heard every possible story about human behavior, read that message twice. She asked Dana's attorney if he had anything to add. He said no. Primary physical custody was awarded to me. Dana received scheduled visitation, supervised for the first 6 months, pending a parenting evaluation. The judge's notes cited the documented financial manipulation, the coordinated family deception, and the evidence of planning to use Connor as a legal instrument as factors in her determination. She noted, specifically and on the record, that a parent who plans the weaponization of a child in a custody dispute demonstrates a judgment problem that supervision is designed to address. I sat in a hallway outside the courtroom afterward, and I called Connor's school to confirm the aftercare schedule for the week. The ordinary logistics of his life. Math homework and soccer practice, and whether he wanted cheese on his sandwich. I had promised myself I would protect those things, and I had. Connor is 10 now. He knows his mother and I don't live together anymore. He knows it in the way children know complicated things, as a fact, to be managed, not fully understood. He asks sometimes why our family is different now, and I tell him that his mother and I stopped being a good team, and that it was nobody's fault. Which is the kind of thing you say to a 10-year-old, because it is kind, and it is true enough. He still draws things, and leaves them for me. Last month it was a drawing of the 2 of us at the beach, which we haven't actually been to yet, but which he is apparently already planning. The DNA question is the one I get asked about the most, when people know the full story. What did I do with that? How did I handle it? The honest answer is that I handled it the way I would handle any structural problem. I identified the issue, I assessed the load-bearing elements, and I made sure the foundation was sound. Connor is my son. The biology is a fact I carry, and he doesn't need to carry with me. He will know the full story when he is old enough for it to be information rather than wound. That is a conversation for a future version of both of us. What he knows right now is that I am there. Every Tuesday and Thursday, and every other weekend he is with his mother, and every single day he is with me, which is most of them. I am there. The house sold in March. I bought a smaller one, 3 miles away, with a room Connor helped paint and a backyard with decent drainage, and a driveway where we shoot hoops on Saturday mornings. It has the particular quality of a place that is exactly what it presents itself to be, which after the years I had just spent I found almost overwhelming in its relief. Owen and I have coffee occasionally. He filed his own civil suit against Paige for the funds she had moved out of their joint accounts. She had taken more than I'd realized, about half of what Dana had taken from me, using the same methods. He is a quiet man and a careful one, and we don't talk about the women much. We talk about his job, which is insurance actuary work, and my current project, which is a flood control system in Virginia, and we talk about Connor, who Owen has always been kind to. I am glad he opened that folder. I am glad he looked at his wife's name and asked her to explain it. There are not enough Owens in the world. I went back to work in full after the settlement was finalized. Knoxville was done by then, and there was a new assignment in Pittsburgh, and I drove there in the late summer with the windows down and a playlist I had not listened to in years, because Dana had always changed the music in the car, and I had always let her. And I sat with that particular small freedom for the length of the drive and found it did not make me sad at all. I believed once that a quiet life was a good life, and I think I was half right about that. Quiet isn't the thing. What I know now is that I want a life that is true, where the accounts mean what they say and the people you trust have earned it, and the house you come home to is actually the house you think it is. Where a man who works long weeks and comes home tired can trust the floor under his feet. I don't know what Dana tells herself now. I don't know what Vivian thinks when she sits in her colonial house in Cary and considers the last 2 years and what her choices cost her family. I stopped needing to know that somewhere around the third mediation session, when I realized that the story I told myself about why they did what they did was my problem, not a fact I could establish. They did it because they thought they could. That is the complete answer. Everything else is just detail. What I know is this. My son taped a drawing to the bathroom mirror 2 weeks ago. He had written something underneath in the careful, earnest block letters of a child who is still learning how letters work together. It said, "Best Dade ein Reilech, Mave the world. Maybe the world. He's a scientist. He does not overclaim." I left it on the mirror